The French Chef is made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation.
Here, though it hardly looks it, we have a who's who of the French imperial court. We have the Prince of Soubise, who is represented by rice and onions. We have the Marquis of Duxelles, represented by diced mushrooms. And we have the Royal Chef Mornay, who will represent cheese sauce. They all join together today in presenting Veal Prince Orloff, which we're doing now on the French Chef. Welcome to the French Chef. I'm Julia Child. In France, an awful lot of dishes are named after famous people, and the people are forgotten, but the dishes live on. And this is very much what happens in the dish we're going to do today, which is Veal Prince Orloff. And it is veal which is roasted and then sliced, and it's stuffed with a puree of rice and onions and sauteed diced mushrooms, and then it's covered with a cheese sauce, which are named after the Chef Mornay. And this is then browned in the oven, and it's a perfectly elegant dish, and it's really what you would call haute cuisine. And haute cuisine just means fancy cooking, which takes longer to do than ordinary cooking. And whenever you're going to do a fancy dish like this, you have to plan out how it's going to be so things will go quickly. And we want to make our Soubise, and for that we have to cook our rice 5 minutes in boiling water, so I'm going to get that done right away so we don't have to think of it again. And this is boiling salted water, and we're going to let the rice cook for 5 minutes. And I will set my timer here, and then as soon as it goes off, we can remove the rice. And then this rice I'm using is just plain, ordinary, white, long Carolina rice. And it hasn't been pre-cooked or pre-digested at all. And it's boiling in about 3 quarts of water with 2 tablespoons of salt. Now this recipe this veau Orloff is for 3.5 pounds of boneless veal. And this will serve 6 to 8 people. And this is boned and tied leg, and it's a very prime quality. It's a very, very pale, lovely pale pink, and it's nice and tender. And train yourself when you're buying veal to look for a very pale pink. If it's dark pink or red, it's no good, it's not tender. Don't buy it, and don't try this recipe until you find this lovely quality of veal. It looks like the dark meat of raw chicken. And that's 3.5 pounds, and it'll serve 6 to 8 people. And we're going to cook this veal in a covered casserole, because that's one of the nicest ways to cook veal. And we're going to brown it first, because that gives more flavor, and I'm browning it just in a very light olive oil, or you could use cooking oil. And before you brown anything or saute anything, you want to be sure that it's very dry. Even if it looks dry, you want to dry it off, because if it isn't dry, you can't brown it. And then your other thing to do is to make sure that your oil is hot. It should be almost smoking. And for browning, it's not sensible to brown something in butter, because if you do, the butter will burn and will give a bad taste. Oil is really very much better. And this is going to, you want to brown so that your browning fat does not darken at all, and you just will keep turning the veal until it browns on all sides. And it'll probably take, about 10 minutes. And then along with our covered casserole, we're using a nice heavy casserole here, we're going to cook some onions and carrots and let them cook very slowly in about 4 tablespoons of butter. And those are going to give a lovely flavor to the veal. And they always give more flavor. There's a half cup of roughly sliced carrots and a cup of roughly sliced onions. And then I'm going to stir them up here and then let them cook very slowly while the veal is browning. I think I'll also put a bay leaf in with the carrots because that'll give them more flavor too as they're cooking. And the reason you cook your carrots and onions first is that once they've cooked, they give out more flavor to the veal, much more so than if they were raw. Now you see, you keep turning your veal, and when you've got it browned on all the sides, you hold up the ends and let it brown on the ends. And it's very convenient just moving it around with spatulas like this. I'm not going to take the time to brown this completely because it would really take about 10 minutes of moderate cooking and turning. But this is the general method. Just remember that your fat is hot and that your veal is dry, and you just keep turning it. And you'll find that this covered casserole roasting is a delicious way to do any white meat, either veal or pork, and it's delicious with chicken. And you always start out the same way. You brown the meat first, and you cook your vegetables, and then you put it all in the casserole. Now I'm going to consider that that's brown enough. And so I'm going to put it into the casserole. Woo! There goes our rice. Now that was 1/4 cup of plain raw rice, which was boiled for exactly 5 minutes. And now I'm going to drain it. And that just gets drained in the sink. And the reason you use so much water is because you want to get rid of all the sort of gummy quality of the rice. And by using a large pan of water and then rinsing it off, you make sure that it isn't going to be gummy. There, so now we've got that all drained. And we shall go on with our veal. And now you've got your veal in the casserole, and then you want to add some salt and some herbs. And just sprinkle salt all over the top of it, and having it all tied like this makes it easier to lift up. I'm using about probably a teaspoon of salt there. And then we already have a bay leaf in, so we don't need another bay leaf, and I'll put in a little bit of thyme, about half a teaspoonful, and just sprinkle that around on the vegetables. And now you have the problem of basting the veal. And the best way of basting, and this is the way it's always done in France, is to get yourself a nice thin sheet of fresh pork fat or suet. And if you have a nice butcher, he'll just cut a piece off of a roast of veal, or I mean a roast of pork or beef. And then you just lay this fat over on top of the meat, and then you want to cover it up with some aluminum foil. And that keeps it nice and cozy because we want it to cook in a steamy way so that all of the juices and all of the flavors of the herbs and the vegetables collect in the casserole and sort of surround the veal. And then you cover your casserole and you're ready to put it into the oven. Now what you can do is, if you want to get this ready ahead of time, you can brown the meat and put the foil over it and then refrigerate it. And then you can go on and bake it later, but you've gotten your main work done. Once you have it in the casserole, you have very little else to do with it. And then just when you're ready to bake it, reheat the casserole on top of the stove, and then you're ready to put it into the oven. And I seem to have lost my towel here. Here's another one. So, and our veal is going to go into a 325-degree oven, and for 3.5 pounds, it should cook an hour and a quarter to an hour and a half. And it depends really on how thick the meat is. If it's long and thin, it'll take less time to cook. And then to make sure that you have cooked it correctly, about, say, 15 minutes before you think it should be done, take the cover off and insert a meat thermometer. And the meat thermometer should read 175 to 180. And be sure that you don't overcook veal, because really overcook is overkill. The veal should be nice and juicy, and the juices run clear yellow. If they run pink, it isn't quite done. But if you don't have any juice in the veal, you have a very disappointing meat. So remember, 175 to 180 is plenty of time for the veal. And now, while the veal is cooking, we can now get to our Soubise. And a Soubise, which was named after the Prince of Soubise, who was the Marquis de Rohan, is nothing but pureed rice and onions. And this is a lovely dish. You don't have to puree it if you don't want to. We'll take 4 tablespoons of butter. This is a very large spoon, so that's about 4. And then we have 3½ cups of sliced onions, and they go right into the pan. And then you stir them all up and put in a bit of salt. I'll put in about half a teaspoon of salt and a little freshly ground pepper. And then we have our rice, and we just put the rice right in and stir it all up. And then this just cooks very quietly by itself. And you don't need any more liquid in it at all, because the raw onions have enough liquid to cook the rice, and the rice has already had its start of cooking because of its boiling. And then also this is to cook very slowly in the oven, and this will also have some aluminum foil on this, because we want it to cook very slowly and not to brown at all. So have a nice heavy casserole of whatever material you like. Which it's always good when you're buying a casserole to be sure that you'll have one that will go either on top of the stove or in the oven. And then this will go into the oven and can cook along with the veal, and it takes just about 40 minutes to cook. And it shouldn't brown. It should be sort of a very faint golden color and wonderfully tender. So that's going along right in with our veal in our 325 oven. And then when it's done and it's tender and golden, then you pass it through a sieve or a food mill or the electric blender, and you have a puree. This is sort of a pale, brown, thick puree. And this you can do way ahead of time for getting this haute cuisine meal done. You can do your puree Soubise. You could do it the day before or even 2 days before, because it certainly isn't long to do. And once it's done, it will keep perfectly in the refrigerator. And if you don't want to puree the Soubise, it's simply lovely just as a vegetable to serve along with your meat. Don't puree it at all, and when it's done and tender, you can do it ahead, reheat it, and stir in a little bit of thick cream and a little bit of grated Swiss cheese, and it makes a perfectly lovely vegetable. You can then brown it in the oven if you want to serve it with sort of a brown crust. But this is, I can see why the Prince of Soubise, who was evidently had a better kitchen than he had anything else, why he lived through that. And now we're going to have our Duxelles, which are diced mushrooms. And these are special diced mushrooms because they're squeezed after you've chopped them up finely. We want 2 cups of chopped mushrooms, and then you put them about a cup at a time in. I'm going to heat my pan because we're going to saute this. About a cup at a time in an impeccably clean towel. And then you squeeze all the juice out of it, because these are fresh mushrooms. And the reason that you do this is because, you see that juice coming out there? You can save that juice and use it for a sauce. But the reason you do this is that you want to, the Duxelles is a stuffing. And you want to get all the liquid that you can out of the mushrooms, so that when you make your stuffing, it's not going to be wet and exude a lot of moisture. Here's our other cup of ready frozen mushrooms. And these are going to saute, and I'm using just the same saute pan that I used for the veal. And the oil has not browned, so I can still use it. If the sauteing oil had browned, I'd throw it out. I'm going to put in just a little bit more butter, too. Then these just cook, for about 5 or 6 minutes until you'll notice them, they absorb all of the fat. And then when they're done, you'll find that that the pieces have all separated. And that takes 5 or 6 minutes over moderate heat. So I'm going to set them over here and let them cook slowly while we get ready with our sauce. You see, if you do a little planning, you can get all of this done, though it seems to have a lot of steps. And now we have our veal here, which has been roasted and is ready. And before we carve it, we want it to relax and rest a little bit. So here's the thermometer that was in, and there's our foil, and here's our fat, which can all be thrown out, and there's our veal. And we'll just let that rest for a while. And now we have all these delicious juices in this casserole. And those we're going to use to make our sauce with. And they also have fat on them, and you've got to get the fat off the juices. So strain it into a pan through a sieve. And then you have all the juices still, which are in these vegetables. And then there's the fat on top. And you can either skim the fat off with a spoon, or you can put it in a long, narrow vessel and squeeze off the fat with a bulb baster, or you can use your separatory funnel. You just pour it right in, and you will notice there that the fat has started to rise to the top, and so this has a glass petcock here, and you just drain them out, and look at that fat there. And you watch very, very, very carefully. As soon as the fat has come to the edge of this valve here, boom, turn it off. And there we are with completely degreased juices. You can get a separatory funnel at any chemist supply place, and really no house should be without them, because it's the best way of draining, of degreasing that I know of. Now we'll take a look at our mushrooms, and we're now ready to make our sauce. And this is going to be our dear old friend, the velouté. And this starts out with another dear old friend called bechamel. And this, we want a very thick sauce here as the bechamel base. And we have 4 tablespoons of butter and 5 tablespoons of flour cooked slowly together for 2 minutes. That's a roux. And then you take it off heat and immediately beat in 2 cups of hot milk and beat it all up with your wire whip. See, that's nice and thick because we want to add the juices to it. And as soon as we add the juices to it, it becomes a velouté. So that just gets heated up. You can see why you want a very thick sauce to begin with, because the veal juices thin it out a bit. Beat it up hard. And then you want to taste it very, very carefully for seasoning, because it should be absolutely perfect, because we're going to use this for quite a number of things. I think it could have a little bit of nutmeg in it. Just a little tiny bit. I have one of these nutmeg graters, which are very useful. It has the nutmeg on top. Just une pointe, which means just a little tiny bit. I'm going to put a little more salt and pepper. You know, the bechamel, or just the milk sauce, is quite boring all by itself, but as soon as you add your flavorings, you'll have something delicious. And now our Duxelles, our mushrooms, are done, and we add the mushrooms to to our puree Soubise, our rice and onions. And this is going to serve as a stuffing for our veal. Get rid of that somewhere. And then we put a little bit, we'll put a little bit of our velouté sauce into the puree of rice and mushrooms. You want to be sure and taste that very, very carefully too. And then this can have a little tiny bit of very thick cream in it. But you want to be awfully sure that you do not thin out this stuffing too much, because it's going to go on the slices of meat. And so it has to be thick. So, and you let it simmer for 2 or 3 minutes to make sure that all of the liquid is out of the mushrooms. And then you are really ready to assemble your veal. I'll just get everything clean and neat here for a moment. Make sure that nothing's overcooking. And we're now ready to carve the meat. And we have, this meat is all tied up, and it's tied so that it will stay in place while it's cooking, because when you have a boned leg, if you don't tie it up, it'll come apart. Now, be sure that you get all the strings off, because it's terrible to eat, to run into some strings when you're eating a piece of meat. There. Now those are all off, and that's now ready to be carved. Now when you carve this, you want to be sure that you have a nice sharp knife. I've got to check all my sauces here. I don't want anything burn. And this would be a very typical knife to use, called a scimitar. And be sure it's good and sharp. And you want to carve it into pieces about 3/16 of an inch thick, serving pieces. And you see that veal is still nice and juicy. It hasn't been overcooked by overkill, and it's very easy to carve with this very sharp knife. Now, if you don't have a sharp knife, and lots of people don't, you can use one of these electric knives, which go very nicely indeed. Beep, beep, beep. See, you don't even go back and forth, because the knife does it for you. So it's also very good for carving sandwich bread too. There. Now our meat's all carved, and you want to be sure that you keep your slices in order, and you'll see why as we start in here. Now, then you have your platter, and it's a good idea to butter the platter, and then you won't have things sticking to it. I always have a pan of melted butter near me. And you can use whatever shape of platter you want. If you have a round one, you can arrange your slices sort of overlapping. And there's your slice of meat, and you spread some of your Duxelles Soubise on top. Now the Duxelles was the Marquis de Duxelles, and nobody seems to know what he did, except he had a very good chef who named this particular type of mushrooms after him. And Mr. Soubise, the Prince of Soubise, was a Maréchal de France, or Field Marshal of France, and evidently he wasn't any good at all as a field marshal, but he had an absolutely marvelous chef. And so that's how his name has lived through. There we have our veal arranged. There's one little slice over which the cook can eat. And now we have our sauce. And this now is just a velouté sauce. And we're going to turn it into a sauce Mornay. And Mornay, nobody is quite sure who Mornay was, but it appears that a chef named cheese sauce after a chef in the 18th century. At least that's as much as I can tell. And this I've just put in a nice handful of grated Swiss cheese and stir it all up. If you have any sauce left over, you can just freeze it. So I always make quite a bit extra usually. And now the sauce is going to go over the veal. And now with these combination of three people, of Mornay and Soubise and Duxelles, we come to Prince Orloff, and that's what this is. And Prince Orloff was a Russian nobleman who was at the court of France in the early 1800s. And it was very chic in those days to have for the Russians to come to Paris and for French chefs to go to Russia. So there was a great exchange of names. And now you have cheese over all and a little melted butter. And the great thing about this dish is that you can get it all arranged to here, and then you can refrigerate it. You could even do it the day before. And when you're ready to cook it, you just refrigerate it just like this. So it's a marvelous party dish. And then when you're ready to cook it, you put it into a 375-degree oven and let it heat through until it's bubbling nicely. And the top is brown. And then you're ready to serve it. And so there we are with the top nicely brown and our velouté sauce with the cheese in it, which turned into a Mornay. So we're now ready to serve. And you can see why I said this was a dish, that was a who's who of the French court, because we've certainly had a lot of princes and whatnot. And we're going to serve with it some braised celery and French bread, and then choose one of your very best red Bordeaux wines. I think a Médoc would be the best. And we're serving a old Chateau Gravy Master, which is delicious with this. So there is our veal, and here are braised celery, which go extremely well with it. And now, as a first course for this elegant meal, you could have oysters on the half shell, or you could have asparagus or artichokes vinaigrette. And then with your marvelous veal Prince Orloff, when you taste this concoction, even if you don't remember who Mornay, Soubise, and Duxelles are, you certainly won't ever forget Prince Orloff. That's immortality. And that's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
Julia Child is co-author of the book Mastering the Art of French Cooking.